So the title of my presentation is Keeping AI Real with Emotional Intelligence, or EI. And I think my subtitle probably is more important, which is Preserving What It Means to Be Human. Now, I asked you a moment ago, how are you feeling? But what I find in my research is that most people actually don't know how they're feeling. We tend to use broad concepts like good, fine, meh. I'm going to ask you to take a moment and really think about how you're feeling. Are you in the yellow, feeling high energy and pleasant? Are you in the green, feeling pleasant but kind of chill? Or are you somewhere over in the blue and the red, a little activated with some unpleasantness? Anybody in the red today? That's good. All right. Blue, feeling unpleasant, low in energy? Nobody's there either? Okay. Try to find the word. Really, what is the specific feeling word that you're feeling right here and right now? Raise your hand if you're feeling more than one feeling. Raise your hand if you're feeling 2 or more feelings. 3 or more. All right, if you have 4 or more, you have to leave. That's a little too many for me to handle. Now, I want another raise of hands. How many of you have gotten distracted sometime today? All right. How many of you are in the field of education? Okay, interesting, right? Even our educators have ADD. So the question is, what do we do with our feelings? And what I'm really interested in this presentation is how do we incorporate the principles of emotional intelligence into the way we think about artificial intelligence? Now, you can look at this slide. It's a lot of detail. But essentially what it says is that we have 2 fields that have emerged at the same time. Back in the 1980s, there were researchers thinking about what can we do with our emotional lives? Maybe there's something or a way we can reason with about our feelings. So Howard Gardner talked about multiple intelligences. My mentors talked about emotional intelligence, the ability to read people accurately, the ability to understand our feelings, the ability to deal with our feelings. And we've now shown through research in our own center, as well as in other labs across the world, that teaching these skills makes a difference. It predicts things like academic achievement, mental health, well-being, and I'll show the details of that in a moment. We know that a lot of schools have adopted these practices, and we even have built technologies to start teaching them. And at the same time, we have the launch of the internet. I'm not going to talk much about that because all of you know about that. You all had email at some point in your lives, and you're all on social media and using different platforms. And the question I've had is, well, how do these 2 things get along? Before I go there, however, I just want to share with you some of the most recent research done by my colleague Chris Cipriano, which shows pretty definitively that when we teach the skills of emotional intelligence, or more broadly, social and emotional learning, pretty great things happen. You can see that the skills themselves go up. We get increased pro-social skills, better relationships, better school climate, better attendance, academic achievement, and the things that we are concerned about in our society, like aggression and bullying and suicide ideation and depression, all drop. Now, here's the problem, that at the same time, when we look at the data right now in terms of what's going on in our society, it's not very attractive. It's quite sad, actually. If we look at the parallel process of emotional intelligence being cultivated, technology emerging, and suicide in our country, we see a 52% increase in suicide in our nation just in the last 20 years. Many hundreds of thousands of deaths for other reasons. 27% of teenage girls, some of you may have seen this research, seriously thought about suicide in 2022. Now, we can get into a lot of data. That's what I do for my living, is I'm a researcher. So we know that 30 to 35% of children are bullied each year in middle and high school. Now, I'm 54 years old. I was pretty badly bullied when I was in school 40-something years ago. You would think that with all of the work we've done in society, that that number would go down. It's pretty flat. The same number of kids are being bullied on a regular basis. And you'll see in some instances it's gone up. We know that 1/3 of our society have depression. 50% of people feel lonely each day. 64% of people feel like they can't even have a conversation with somebody who has a different opinion than they have. And sadly, as you all have seen probably, in the last couple years in particular, we see more racism across all sectors, all races, religions, ethnicities. Unfortunately, gender identity, et cetera, has risen. As a matter of fact, 40% of our LGBTQIA youth seriously thought about suicide in the last couple of years. Now, how many of you would agree? I'm just curious. How many of you feel like your life might be a little better, you might be a little healthier, happier, if the quality of your relationships were a little better? All right, everybody needs to raise their hand. Seriously, take a moment and think about that. How many of you feel like there are days when you just feel like a little disconnected? People don't feel that way? I feel that way every day. I'm even at work sometimes and I'm trying to figure out, on Zoom meetings, trying to figure out, like, how do I build relationships with these people? Now, in summary, kind of just from my opening, we know that poor mental health and loneliness are caused in large part by a lack of meaningful relationships. We know that people have a desire to connect. And unfortunately, I'm going to say they have a desire to connect with something. My hope is that we would have a desire to connect with someone or people. And we're here at a conference where lots of technologists are trying to help. So with that said, let's think about the potential role of AI and EI, and also think about some caveats. I think we'd all agree that AI is being used to spot problems early and address loneliness. We see a lot of things happening there. AI is developing standards of care for therapy and trying to collect outcome metrics. We see that we're trying to build tools, including work that I'm doing right now, to help people cultivate good relationships. But I think we need to be a little careful. Let me give you an example of that. So people in my position oftentimes get asked to be consultants. And so sometimes we take those jobs because they look very interesting. So one time I was doing a consulting for a very large social media company, and I was asked to help build technology to support kids who are being bullied. And I did a lot of research. I studied thousands of adolescents, trying to understand what their needs were, what language was going to be the best to support them. And I delivered these concepts to the organization. And then a bunch of people who work at that organization said things like, well, we don't like that language. I said, well, I don't care if you don't like it. Like, this is what the adolescents who are the ones suffering are saying resonates with them. And it became a really big problem in terms of building a product, because the people who were building the product didn't understand how brains develop. They didn't understand children's development. In another instance, I was asked to consult for another organization where it was a device where you talk to the device. You can all think about what that might be. And all of a sudden, I realized that I was being put in a position where I was trying to get people to talk to this device all day long and ask it lots of questions. And I said, I don't think that's really kind of anything I'm interested in doing. Like, my hope is that people who are suffering get support from someone. My hope is that people who are lonely actually go out and meet people and have good relationships. And so I say this because I think that we need to be careful. Right? AI is not a sentient being. And virtual assistants, while they can be helpful to schedule things for you, I think we need to be mindful that they're not the best to be in relationship with. And essentially, what I want to argue also is that when you think about emotions and relationships, there's a difference between knowledge and skill. Does everyone understand what I mean by that? Like, I can accumulate knowledge by asking questions. But I have a really, how many of you were really, got a moment during the pandemic where you're like, I hate my life? How many of you ever had that moment? Like, I can't take it anymore. I was in a situation where my mother-in-law was living with us. She got stuck, she's from Panama, and got stuck here because there were no flights back to Panama. And I tried everything. I was like, I'm going to do my breathing exercises. I breathed in and breathed out, and I kept on saying to myself, and now it's even clearer why you need to get out of my house. It was tough. And I would even go online and say, strategies for dealing with difficult mother-in-laws. And she wasn't even that difficult. And it can give you scripts of things that you can say and do, but you actually have to say and do them. And then people respond to those things. And there was one night where I tried stuff, and my mother-in-law looked at me, she goes, "Are you really the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence?" And I'm like, "Not tonight, not tonight." And I share that with you because that was the moment where I had an epiphany. I'm like, "Mark, you stink as a son-in-law. Like, you really need to reflect on your behavior. You need to go to bed tonight and think about how you're going to show up tomorrow morning as your best self." And I need to talk to people about that and problem solve about that. That's what I'm hoping will happen in our world. I'm hoping that we can build AI that can inform it, but if we don't teach people how to use it and we don't build AI that supports it, I think we're going to be in trouble. Now, that's the last part of my presentation. So here we go. How many of you believe that you got an adequate education in emotions growing up? Raise your hand. Okay, no one's hand went up. One person who is, the son or daughter of a therapist, which is also problematic, by the way. Then you just talk too much about your feelings. But here's what we know. We know that emotions are data. We know that there is no such thing as a good or bad emotion. We know that our feelings influence everything we do, from our attentional capacity to the decisions we make to the way we respond to other people. Ever noticed that? Like someone who makes weird facial expressions? Like you have a response to that, like approach or avoid. I think it's very important to understand that emotions are inextricably linked to identity and culture. What does that mean exactly? Well, I think it means that some of the movies that we watch and some of the programs that we teach kids about emotion are very centric to American ways of thinking about things. So for example, if I do this, how am I feeling? Fine. I'm feeling elated right now, but I just don't want to show you that elation. And so if you're using AI to detect facial expressions, you're not going to get inside the person's brain where they're having feeling. You're going to make what's called the attribution error. You're going to make a mistake by thinking that feeling is showing up in people's facial expressions when cross-culturally people don't use the same facial expressions and display the same emotions. What if I came up here and I said, "I hate school"? How am I feeling? Angry or frustrated, so it may seem. Truth is, I might be feeling shame. You have no clue, because behavior does not correlate with emotion. We're taught to behave a certain way because we're boys and we don't want to be seen as babies. So we're going to display anger when we feel sadness or when we feel shame. Now, also, it's important that we have to understand there are real skills here. There are underlying skills that help us to be emotionally intelligent. So for example, accurate recognition of emotion, understanding where those feelings come from. I could ask you right now, what's the psychological difference between anger and disappointment, or jealousy and envy, or stress or pressure? And my research would say that 95% of you would not be able to do it well. You would just not be able to define those feelings. But yet we have technology that say, stress, do this, anxiety, do that. When actually for each person, those things might mean something very different. We know from our research that leaders at Fortune 500 companies are seeking people that have these skills. We know that people with more developed emotional intelligence are happier, they're healthier, they're more productive. We know from our own research that leaders of organizations that have these skills have people that work in those organizations that are healthier, happier, more productive. So my argument is that we need to formalize this work. And we need to formalize it, I think, first in education. We need to move away from a quick fix mentality and move towards more systemic integration of these skills, where leaders, teachers, students, and families are learning the skills simultaneously. Why? Children are learning these skills at home. They need to practice them at home. They need to practice them at school. They need to practice on the playground. And the big argument for that is that prevention is just way more cost-effective than intervention. Right? We're going to have less burden. We're going to put less responsibility on schools and workplaces to have to deal with the mental health problems that we have today if we can build the protective factors or the skills. I want to also say that I firmly believe that CEOs of every company here And policymakers across the United States and in other countries need to be deeply versed in emotional intelligence. What do I mean by that? Well, let's think about the examples I gave you. If the manager of the department that I was consulting in understood the research that I share with you about emotion, maybe the people who were doing the programming would have listened to me a little better. Think about that for a minute. If the people who were constructing devices understood the concepts of addiction, understood the concepts of what it means to have human connection and how that impacts neurochemicals like oxytocin and builds your immune system and builds better relationships, maybe, just maybe, they would make different choices. So I'd like you to imagine a world where corporate and public decisions and policies are judged by how they affect the ability of people, and especially children, handle their emotions. Take a moment and just think about that. What might be different? What would be different if the policymakers in our country and other countries were held accountable for the impact of their decisions on people's emotional development? Now, I'm going to end. I've got 1 minute to share with you some resources that you can take away. So I was very fortunate that over the last couple of years, I worked with the co-founder of Pinterest, Ben Silberman, and a team of people to create an app that's called How We Feel. How We Feel is that tool that I opened up with, but with lots of different features. So ways to check in with your feelings, ways to kind of tag your feelings for what you're doing and where you're at, ways to analyze those data, all personalized to help you understand your emotional life and learn effective strategies for dealing with your feelings. So please check it out. It is free, based on generous donations, and it will always be for free, both on iOS and Android. I also want to share with you, if you really want to go deep into the principles of emotional intelligence, that I just launched this new webcast. My first guest was the singer Jewel. That's Angela Duckworth, the author of Grit. I've got Guns N' Roses that I just recorded with, the First Lady of Canada, as well as researchers like Dr. Alfie and my friend Ethan Cross, all talking about the science of emotions and helping us make better choices with them. The lion's share of my work is in schools. This is our model. It's called Ruler. If you're interested in the work that we do in schools, I encourage you to check it out. We're now in 5,000 schools across 27 countries. And we work with principals, teachers, students, and district-wide models. My last slide is that I want to make sure you can stay connected. That's my personal website. Much of what I talked about today is based in a book that I wrote called Permission to Feel. And tomorrow, we're going to do a workshop on taking a deep dive from what I talked about today on the principles and skills of emotional intelligence. And I also was able to produce a movie over the last year called America Unfiltered, and we're going to do a screening of that tomorrow as well. And on that note, thank you.